Saturated mint of death. Yay, yay, we're back. All right, so we're on our next panel, hosted by the lovely Elemental and Kudrel. They're going to be talking about foam and thermoplastics. And I just want to give a shout out. Go check out our dealers and artists on our Facebook page and our website. They have lots of cool stuff. And also, we are doing this as a bit of a fundraiser for the Guelph Food Bank. You can find more information on our website, www.conji.ca, which is now working again. We had a bit of an issue this morning, but it is up. And take it away, you guys. Whenever you're
Hello.
ready.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Also, thank you for the happy birthday wishes. We survived one more year.
Good afternoon, everybody. Also, thank you for birthday wishes. Amanda and I are like a day apart for birthdays.
Yep, and it's Jen today, so it's all the February birthdays. So yeah, welcome to our foam and thermoplastics panel. A couple of short heads ups to begin with. First being that this is not the most super organized thing. We kind of are doing it a little off the cusp in true kanji fashion. So we're going to try to cover some of the basics for those of you in the room who are not aware, but we also know that a bunch of you are at least familiar with the basics. So we really want to either just focus on tips and tricks and answering questions. So for the love of all that is holy, please ask questions, because this makes it a very difficult panel if you don't have any. And also, like, feel free to ask just about anything about like the products. There are no dumb questions, with the exception of how large is a 9x12 sheet. And yes, I have to answer that question at least once a week. So yeah, I'm gonna have a screen going as well, so that we can talk about things and you can see some pretty pictures. Let's see here if I can get that picture up. Look at that. Isn't that pretty?
Did you take that?
No, I did not, and I should be able to tell you the photographer, but I've completely blanked on it. But that is, I believe that is Athena cosplay. We use a bunch of her work for the. Oh, yeah, it's full disclosure. I work for cosplaysupplies.com, and I am the content manager for Warbler.com. So while I will talk about other thermoplastics, a lot of the focus on thermoplastics is going to be Warbler, because I do prefer it, and it's also literally my job, so I know the most about it. But we're not going to ignore the other ones. That's just where a lot of this information is going to be coming from. So there's our social media if you'd like to follow us, if you're not already doing so. And we're going to start with foam, because most Warbler is actually based or worked off of foam. So really, an introduction to foam is the best way to start.
That's very true.
Would you like to take the lead, Crystal, on that one?
Well, foam is definitely more versatile than Warbler. You can do almost anything with it. Like, you can shape it, not as easily, but it does shape, and you can even create texture with it. It's great because it's super lightweight. The only downside is that it's not incredibly durable. And that's why I find using the Warbler over is how you get that strength, although you're also adding weight to it. So for like big armor builds and stuff, it's great. You can get it in a whole bunch of different thicknesses, and it's super, super easy to like cut and shape, and yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't done any sort of work with foam before, foam is kind of a misnomer because we use a lot of different types of foam. Most foam is going to be EVA foam, which is also, if you've worked with craft foam before, craft foam is EVA foam, fun foam, foamies, any of those varieties. And for the longest time, you had two options, which was the stuff you get at the craft store in sheets or rolls, and then the puzzle mats, Those were your two main products. As cosplay has gotten broader and more marketable and a wider business proposition, more companies are catering to cosplayers, so there are now more options of EVA foam in various densities, which is how heavy, like how dense it is, which determines how much it weighs, but also determines how squishy it is, and how easy it is to shape, as well as different thicknesses. So if you were going to be looking online, there are lots of different suppliers. I believe Red Moon Cosplay sells foam, Cosplay Supplies sells foam, Arda sells foam. These are all in Canada. TNT does sell foam if you're in the US. They no longer ship to Canada, which is a sad thing, but the shipping rates went up thanks to COVID and they just couldn't justify it. Foam is heat formable, so if you want to get curves and stuff, you can do that with heat. A lot of the time, though, you're going to be shaping things by piecing it together. There is an upper limit to how much it'll stretch, that limit is pretty narrow, shallow, so to speak. But one thing that I want to stress right away, and because safety is a big thing for me, is EVA foam and basically all forms of foam that you can be working with off gas. Even if they tell you it's non-toxic, this is the thing that drives me absolutely bonkers. So I'm gonna rant about it for a second. But you will hear people tell you that their foam is non-toxic, and the problem is non-toxic means as it is meant to be used, and none of the tests as meant to be used include heat forming it. And when you are heating it, you are letting off gas, and that gas is not particularly good for you. So please, please, if you are heat forming any sort of foam more than like a very small sheet, make sure you're working in a well ventilated room with an actual cross breeze. Please make sure that you are wearing some sort of respirator, and also keep in mind your pets or the other people in your household. We have had cosplayers kill their birds heating foam that would be theoretically non-toxic. Non-toxic, as a rule, is as it's tested, as it's meant to be used. Foam is meant to be used as insulation or padding or floor covering. Nobody tests it for heating it up and breathing in the fumes. Please, please, please be careful. Oh, we got a question. When you use the foam, it distorted the shape. I think I'd need slightly more context. So the foam might not have been thick enough. The foam might not have been dense enough. If you body heat can even shape it. So one of the things to keep in mind is again that foam is really wonderful. I would argue that it's more I don't think it's more flexible or more maneuverable. I've forgotten the word that Kudrel used than wearable. I think they both are incredibly varied in their
Versatile.
versatile. Thank you. I've forgotten the word. My caffeine has not kicked in yet. I think they're both incredibly versatile and can both do basically anything. It's just cost.
Yes,
That really
it's much
comes
cheaper.
into
Foam is much cheaper.
so much cheaper. So, like, as somebody who sells and works and represents and has gone to Germany and Texas for Warbler, I will never tell you Warbler is the best thing to use. Warbler is something that needs specific applications. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you shape foam. If you haven't shaped before. For foam scales, so were you heating them when they were deforming, or did they deform after you wore them, Captain, yesterday? So
I find the density is going to affect how well it's going to handle heat. So if you have like a very squishy, very light foam, it's going to need less heat. Otherwise, it might shrivel like that.
Yeah, foam shrinks. That's something people don't realize, especially less dense foam. The less dense it is, the more it's going to shrink. That can be great, but that can also be a problem if you're not aware of it. One of the ways that you can get around that is to preheat the foam before you start working with it. But also, the cheaper your foam is, the more likely, like if you're using just fun foam from Michaels, the more likely it's going to deform. Yeah, dollar store stuff is actually probably the worst to work with. I find foam is made out of like cells of holes in between the actual polyurethane or the ethyl vinyl acrylate. So the heat makes those expand, which actually damages the integrity of the foam, and then it shrinks because the gas leaks out. So yeah. So when you're shaping foam, almost always if you're trying to create complex shapes, you're going to be doing them by piecing them together. You want to think of foam a lot closer to paper than spandex.
It's kind of
Foam,
like sewing.
yeah.
You're creating curves, putting darts in, and yeah, shaping it sort of to your body, just like you would fabric.
Yeah, foam work really requires a good sense of geometry and a good ability to flat pattern. One of the things that I prefer Warbler for is how forgiving it is. If you screw up with foam, the plus side is it's cheap. You put it aside and you try again. But if you are somebody who does not enjoy having to repeat something to get it right, that can be a huge detriment, especially for curves. Especially for complex curves or deep curves. Like you can cheat a lot with foam, and I'm very fond of using it for base breastplates. But when you're trying to do something like a complex pauldron where you've got both an interior and exterior curve, I can't remember what they're called, but like a C and a V in the piece, for example, or you're trying to do something large scale like a hat. Those, when you're dealing with breadth of the product where it wants to fight against itself, or you're dealing with complex curves where it wants to pull, both of those can be really difficult. And then on top of that, foam really requires contact cement, and contact cement tends to be pretty toxic, which is another issue that comes from working with foam.
I use hot glue.
Now that's I've had mixed success with hot glue.
Very well.
Yeah. I think it depends on what sort of seams you're looking for as well.
Yes.
And whether or not that piece is going to flex. I know people use crazy glue, cyanoacrylate works pretty well as long as it is not a piece that's going to be under torsion. So it's I use a lot of crazy glue for adding details like strips and pieces on top, but I dislike it for anything that's like a curve because I find it will want to pull apart. So these are some examples of work that you've done with some really crazy curves. Like, look at that. That's a phenomenal.
Yeah. And the trick with that is once you've stuck your pieces together, you'll want to fill in those cracks, and then you can like go back and sand it to get it nice and smooth, and then you don't see the creases. But now there's ways that you can, if you cut all your edges on like a bit of an angle, they'll like piece together nicer. And you can also just Dremel them to create like so like you're putting them together like this, and then you don't get that little gap. But that takes a lot of planning to get it that way.
Oh, thanks, Rex, for the crinoacrylate references. That is good to know, actually. I didn't realize that there's some crinoacrylates that allow for flexibility in some way. So that is something I definitely need to look into because I use crinoacrylates for transpart, which we'll talk about potentially in a bit. So here are some more examples of how curves and multiple pieces together can give you foam bases that also finish beautifully. These are from Conway Cosplay. If you are looking for an introduction to foam or Warbler, Conway's a good source for both. Evil Ted is phenomenal for foam work. TNT Cosplay carries some phenomenal resources as well. So those are the places I'd recommend getting started with. Texturing foam is great if you want to talk about how you did this.
Yes, so that I wanted to get a leather look, and so I heated up the foam and then took some tinfoil that was already crinkled a bit, and you press that onto the foam. The only thing is that once that you've done that, you can't heat up the foam again, then you're going to lose the texture again. So you got to let it cool down, and then you can kind of play with it a bit more, but basically once you've put your texture in, you're going to lose it as soon as you try heating that up again. So it's something you want to do after, like last, pretty much.
Yeah, I love making foam look like leather. It's such a great way of getting that sort of finish and technique. I thought this was really cool. Do you want to talk about this one and like how you got the curves on the end there? Was that a Dremel?
Yeah, the same sort of thing I had mentioned before, where you cut the all your pieces that are going to connect with slight curve, so that when they press together, you won't have that gap there, and it also gives it a little bit of a curve, like overall. And then once all the pieces were together, I just heated the whole thing and sort of like shape it to my head so that it would curve and stay that way. And it's also finished with like that hammered look spray paint.
I
To
love
make more like
Rust-Oleum's hammer tone. It's great. Yeah, I believe that is the Demona crown.
It is, yes.
This is super cool.
This was actually made with that foam board that you can get at the dollar store and Staples and stuff. It's like
Foam core?
got the Bristol board on each side, and it's just foam on the inside. That stuff is actually great too for making swords. If you press a couple pieces together, and then you can kind of like carve the edges down to get like a nice point to your blade. The only thing is it's tricky to like you have to fill in where the cardboard isn't showing to get it the same like smooth.
What do you use for filling in for those?
Usually wood filler is my favorite thing to use because it's very sandable.
So here's more foam as leather.
More leather. Same technique I used, and then I also, after when I painted it, I did several different colors to make it look very like worn out. That's its own thing, is the way you paint it is going to affect what it looks like and what you're trying to mimic with it. And that was a helmet. I think there's a finished picture of it somewhere as well.
There is as well.
That was an interesting piece to make. And then like there's the parts up on top of the forehead I actually carved into. And that's the cool thing with foam, is that you can either add layers to get a texture going up, or you can cut into it and create textures going in. You can even like lightly, say if your foam is a bit thicker, you go over it with a lighter carving, and then once you heat it, because it shrinks, it will open up that shape a bit. I think there's another example of that. It's the there's a vest where I made like a.
There we go.
Yep, the vest on the left there. That's how I did the little texture you see in it, was by just carving into it, and then after it heated, it opened it up. And 3D, what's it called? 3D paint is great on top of it as well to create like very small details. And you can do very organic-y things like this here.
Yeah, I was like, I think the organic shape you achieved with this foam is really, really impressive, because that's not easy to do.
It's really fun, and it's like very forgiving too, because you can literally just cut the piece however you want, and you put the heat on it, and you just sort of like shape it around, and you just keep adding more pieces, and that's how I did that part.
Yeah, foam clay is fantastic. We don't have a lot of examples of it here, just because I think neither of us have used it for a large build yet. But I do really love it. It's the thing is quality seems to sometimes be hit or miss, like even within brands. And the other thing that I have found is people reporting at this point from using the the first runs of it, is the longevity doesn't seem to be there. So whatever you're working on for foam clay, much like regular foam, please make sure that it's not something that you want to be around in 5 years, because it might not be.
Foam clay is good for doing the seams too, for filling in the seams. You can sand that too.
See,
this was actually just small sheets that I used for this, like the very thin sheets of foam. And sort of just
more foam work.
See that
and here's some scales.
Before Warble was a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can buy scales too. You can buy them in bulk, like just a pack of scales, and then you heat those up and shape them the way you want. I think you can also buy textured foam sheets.
Yeah, they've just started selling those now. Yeah. So more layers, so this is using different thicknesses of foam to get that effect.
And I even put fabric over parts of this. So if that's another thing you want to do, if you wanted to create your texture with the fabric, you can kind of wrap it around the pieces.
And there's the finished product.
The top part of this is not foam. This was before Warbler was a thing, so it's paper mache. But the plates that are going down is just an example of like layering foam on top of each other to get more texture.
And here is an example of working with foam and Warble at the same time. This is one of Crystal's. We're going to be covering a lot more of that in a second, but you can see you create the depth with foam first, but then you add Warbler to give it basically a hard plastic layer to make it immobile. Something with this much Warbler and this sort of shape won't move, and nearly indestructible.
I still have that armor, and it still looks just as good as it did when I made it like 10 years ago.
Yep. One of the big differences between working with foam and working with Warbler, working with Warbler and foam, is the longevity. If you are making something and you're going to wear it once or twice, and it doesn't need to be durable, work with foam 100%. If you are making something and it needs to last several wears, it needs to last several years, it needs to travel a lot or be in a suitcase a lot, Warbler is going to be a very important thing to consider. Or there are other ways of hardening foam. Warbler is just one of the easiest and cheapest and least toxic out of those options. So does anybody have questions about foam? Sorry, go ahead.
You'll lose the flexibility, but you'll gain the longevity.
Yeah. So if there are more foam questions, go for it. Otherwise, we will move to thermoplastics.
I wish I could see the question.
To catch up.
I can't see the chat.
Yeah, I've got the chat up. Yeah, this is you need multiple monitors going. So thermoplastics, which are my bag of beans, are literally as they sound. Thermo meaning heat, plastic being plastic. Oh yes, please wear a respirator while sanding and shaping foam. So all plastics are technically thermoplastics because all plastics will melt when enough heat is applied. When we talk about thermoplastics for cosplay, we are speaking about a specific set that are aimed towards costume, scenic, prop, or craft use that are generally non-toxic. Pardon me. And generally come in two forms, pellet or sheet. Thermoplastics used to be a much higher temperature range. That includes old stuff like styrene and Sintra, which you will very rarely hear referenced. And I'm not really going to cover them here, but they are older styles of thermoplastics. They're much more difficult to use, and they are toxic. They are hard to cut, but they still have their uses and they still have their applications. If you are curious about them, the RPF is actually a really great place for learning about older techniques, possibly because the RPF is occasionally full of people who hate new stuff. Anyway, so these are pictures of Warbler. This is finest art, crystal art, Cobra cast art, and transpa art, respectively, from left to right, top to bottom. Please don't ask me about the name or the naming conventions. Blame the Germans. Warbler can do anything foam can do, personally. The differences are cost, weight, finishing. Those are where your stops lie. But as we said, you're generally speaking going to be using Warbler for reinforcing, for organic shapes, and for where you need more forgiveness. Warbler is going to let you fix mistakes a lot easier than foam does. Downside, you screw up with Warbler too much, you may still have to buy a new sheet, but you haven't lost the sheet you've used. Warbler plastics are reusable. Unlike foam, if you screw it up, you could cut your piece down and maybe reuse some of that foam, but there's a lot of waste with foam because at some point, like, there are pieces you can't use, you gotta toss.
My favorite thing about Warbler is that you can use all of the scraps.
All of it. And it is, for a plastic, decently environmentally conscious. People are always like, "Oh, is it good for the planet?" And I'm like, "It's a plastic. It's not good for the planet. It's a plastic." But it's for a plastic.
More
It
usable.
yeah, it's completely usable. So what you use is functionally what you buy is everything you get. So it is more expensive. A meter by a meter and a half is going to run you, if you're buying through the cheapest supplier, which is Cosplay Supplies online. It's going to be about $88, including your shipping. But you will use the entirety of that sheet. The fill material is always recycled plastic, wood, rice husks. So it is attempts to use the least amount of plastic necessary to make the product. So this is some examples of Warbler. These are like you can get and go anywhere. And again, the idea is that all of these costumes might be several years old and still look exactly like this. They might have some chipped paint, but unless I should also note, Warbler being thermoplastic means it heats at a lower temperature range to make it safe for us to use without needing specialized equipment, which means you can't leave it in a hot car.
Yeah.
So all of these things still look great because they have not been left in the car in the parking lot on Sunday at a convention. If you do that, you are not going to have a costume. You're going to have a puddle. Warbler doesn't liquefy, it just sags. So this is an example we talked about using foam and Warbler. So you could make these blasters out of foam, but as a handheld prop and something that's going to get put down and picked up and potentially held by other people, you're going to see damage even by the end of one con. Made out of Warbler, I think these are 5 years old, and they still look exactly like this. There is nothing. Like I could take a photo side by side and you wouldn't be able to tell which one was older. Warbler is also getting some phenomenal use in couture work, so I just wanted to showcase these. These are just this was one of the corset competitions last year, the alien butterfly moth thing one. So a couple of other plastics, just covering our bases. There is also Wonderflex. Generally speaking, if you live in Canada, you are not going to use Wonderflex if you have access to Warbler. The price is about the same. If you live in the US, Wonderflex is a little bit cheaper, but Wonderflex acts more like foam. It's more of a flat pattern plastic. It has some stretch, but not a lot of stretch. So for complex curves, it is not great. It kind of does the work, it kind of doesn't. There is a mesh that reinforces it, so it does make it stronger. And it's probably one of the oldest cosplay friendly plastics out there. True facts, I am the first cosplayer to use it for cosplay, and I was the first one to introduce it to the cosplay community back in 2012. It's been around for a while. It was actually designed, or at least partially designed, for Disney. And they use it for their animatronics. They also now use Warbler for a bunch of stuff. But it is a great plastic for being cheaper, but it is not nearly as user-friendly as Warbler. Between the two, I have a lot of teachers I work with, and nobody will use Wonderflex over Warbler if they have access to both. But Wonderflex is cheaper if you were in the US by about $20 a sheet. But hey, $20 is $20. And if you're not doing complex curves, consider Wonderflex for some things. Phosshape is another thermoplastic that you don't hear a lot about. It's used mostly in theaters, but it's thermoformable felt. So you could sew it. It shrinks by about 30%, so it's really great for skull caps and hats. Basically, it's an alternative to wool for hat blocking. The downside is it can only be activated once. So once you've heated it and it's formed, it doesn't reheat or reshape particularly well. It can be painted afterwards, but so it's used a lot for like fake wigs, hair pieces, building up interior wigs because it's incredibly lightweight and very strong. Fantastic if you need tails with a slight curve but aren't particularly heavy, because it will keep a shape. Honestly, if you imagine a plastic felt that's very stiff, once it's heated, it gets to a very very durable, stiff consistency, but it
The
can
ultimate
create crush.
interfacing.
Yeah. Downside is it's pretty thick. It's about 2.5 to 3 millimeters thick. So while it's often used for things like collars and cuffs, especially on stage, doesn't work as well for things that are going to be photographed close up because the bulk is really obvious. Here are some examples of phosphate being used. And very lightweight. Can't stress that enough. Okay, so the Warblers Art Series, which is my child, so to speak, even though I was not at all involved with making it. Warbler is non-toxic, straight up. This includes when you heat it up. It's literally been tested for that. You don't need any specialized tools besides a heat gun and a heat-safe workspace. So that's super handy if you have not used it before. You basically buy some Warbler, work on a empty table with some parchment paper, and you buy a cheap heat gun from Amazon, Canadian Tire, or Harbor Freight, depending on where you live. And you might need a pair of gloves, depending on how heat sensitive you are. That is the entirety of your work process. Everything else is a bonus. I love working with sculpting tools, and you will probably end up working a lot with foam, but you can pretty much do anything with Warbler. The thing I usually describe Warbler, if you've never seen it worked before, is it's a sheet, for the most part, most of them, that when you heat it, it becomes soft and pliable, like a warm beeswax or a wet leather. And it sticks to itself. I'm actually just going to ask the chat, does anybody want me to actually go through the types of Warbler, or do you want me to just, skip ahead to the next part? Because there are 8 types currently, 7 types, 9 types, 7 types, I think.
And I guess some are less sticky than others.
Yeah. So the strongest Warbler is going to be mesh art. So finest art is brown orange skin. Probably the most commonly used. Next to that is, I love this guy. This guy is really cool. This is Warbler over tinfoil. Black art and finest art are the most commonly used. They can be used interchangeably. Black art has a sister product that is pearly art that can also be used interchangeably with black art. If you've never used pearly and you're vaguely curious about it, pearly is just like black art, except some people think it's stickier. I kind of agree at this point, but it's a small difference in terms of stickiness. And it has a higher thermal transfer and it cools faster. That's the big thing. I would not recommend pearly being your first Warbler because it's if you're not used to using hot products, it's a little ouchy. Not burny, just ouchy. And it also, because it cools faster, it's a little more annoying if you're still figuring out your range of when it's hot, when it's workable, when it's sticky, and when it's still warm but not actually functioning the way Warbler likes to work. But our main products are black art, finest art, pearly art, and if you had one of them in your house, you could do that project no matter which one you wanted. The determination really comes down to things like finest art has more of a texture, so it takes more time to finish if you need a really smooth finish, and black art and pearly art are smoother. Black art and pearly art are better for really fine details because they don't have that texture, and they are also a little less sticky. Black art is the least sticky out of the 3, so if you're doing really fine work, like say the decal, the Dragon Age logo on the chest there, if you were placing it down and you screw up, you can take that off if you're doing black art to black art, pearly art to black art, pearly art to pearly art, etc., without worrying about warping the Warbler underneath. If you press finest art to finest art, it does not want to come off. It is stuck.
You're done.
Yeah. Detail work is often best left for the slightly less stickier guys. Oh yeah, the Michaels clearance. Everyone's like, oh god. So Warbler is now carried at Michaels. Most Michaels, not all. And it gets clearanced occasionally, and it gets clearanced because it's not skewed as a perennial item. It's skewed as a seasonal item, even though it's a perennial item. So occasionally, if the store is changing the way their SKU setup is left, it doesn't get removed to a different store. It just gets clearanced out. So if you see it for clearance, snag it, but don't expect to find it at clearance at another store. Just buy it at that price. It's great. Also, do not buy your
one of those 50 off coupons. Just
Oh,
buy
yeah.
a big
I was going to also say, do not buy your Warbler at Michael's unless you are super, super desperate or you have a coupon. It is priced assuming you have a 50% off coupon. So it is 50% more than it would be online because they want to make a profit. So this is the sort of detail work you can do with Warbler that you just can't do with foam. Like, you could do it with foam clay. I'll say that. You can do this with foam clay, but it's very difficult to sculpt foam clay like this. You still are going to want to be like molding foam clay and then applying it afterwards for this sort of work. You can go down to 1 millimeter in detail for black and pearly Warbler.
That's where the scraps come in handy.
Yes, because it turns into a clay. So you can see here, this is pearly was used for all of that filigree. Actually, this is all pearly, but the filigree work, that's all pearly as well. So mesh art, we had a question about what's strongest. Mesh art. If you have not used mesh art before, get yourself a small sheet to play with. It is not your main Warbler building material, but it is phenomenal as a base, and it is incredibly great for when you need to do domes or things that are going to be freestanding, like that Pokeball. Like, that dome has no darts. That is a full, almost 60% of a plastic dome that I shaped the Warbler over and then popped it right off. And there is one extra line of Warbler on the inside to keep the plastic from like bending and squishing, because it's a circle, so it without that reinforcement, it's going to want to squish it out. And now I have a fully functioning purse. I made the hinge out of mesh art as well, and that purse is 4 years old at this point, and still looks. I mean, the paint job needs to be fixed because I never sealed it. The chain rubs against it, but it is incredibly durable. If you've used Wonderflex before, mesh art is nearly 10 times stronger on a curve than Wonderflex. It is also incredibly sticky. So if you need to do something like, if you take a look at the glove that's pictured on the left there, that is over a physical glove, that gauntlet. They did mesh art rings. And so there's no glue. There's no putting your glove on and then hot gluing something and then getting burned through the hot glue through the fabric. This is just mesh art rings that bonded to the fabric, and they're not going anywhere. Mesh art is so sticky on the smooth side. So that would be the strongest Warbler, but it does not stretch the same way the other ones do, and it is not sculpt the way the other ones do. So all the other Warblers we've talked about, you could take your scraps and you could squish them up, you heat them up, and you squish them up, and now you've got clay. And you could roll that clay out. Now you've got a new sheet.
Like a putty.
Yeah, you've got putty. You've got a shapeable, moldable clay that never expires, never goes bad. I have Warbler that is literally from 2015 at this point, that is indistinguishable, except it's slightly darker in color because the dye lots have changed. That is still fine. You will occasionally hear people tell you that Warbler will only last a few years, and it's actually just friendly plastic with a new name. Those people do not know what they're talking about, and I would really appreciate if they shut up. If you've used friendly plastic, you will know that after a period of time, anywhere between 5 to 10 years, depending on its exposure to light, it does degrade. And friendly plastic are the little white pellets. And that is because it is a non-complex plastic. I've forgotten the full details. So basically, there's a complex type of chain of atoms, chemicals. Let's go chemicals. There are complex chains of chemicals, and there are simple chains of chemicals. And simple plastics degrade, which is good in a lot of ways. Because like that makes them biodegradable. The downside being is that you lose longevity that way. The complex plastics last a lot longer. This is why the plastic bottles in your ex-boyfriend's basement that are from 2002 look and feel the same as a new one would. Those are complex plastics, not simple. Warbler, for the most part, is made out of complex plastics. If you have not worked with a clear plastic before, and if you have not worked with Transpart before, if you've not worked with Warbler before, if you've not worked with thermoplastics before, please do not make your first plastic that you've ever worked with Warbless Transpart. Let me introduce you to the most difficult plastic we sell. Transpart is a clear plastic like an acrylic, but it is not acrylic. It is indestructible. If you need a clear thing or a transparent thing or a translucent thing, Transpart will do it for you. Downside, really difficult to use. Has a much higher activation point. Most of the other plastics we've talked about activated about 70 to 90 degrees Celsius. So when you heat them up, they cool down a couple of degrees and you can handle them. It's like a little ow hot maybe, but it's fully handleable. And once it's at the cooler range of that, you can even shape it to your face, which I've totally done with masks and things. Transpart does not follow that category. Transpart will burn you. I have watched people burn themselves while doing panels.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't really start to shape until it gets that hot.
It is 120 degrees Celsius before it is activated.
Yeah.
Water boils at 100, guys. You must wear PPE when working with Transpart. There is no, like, you could definitely see people who work with it without gloves on, like, YouTube, but they are not fully activating it, and they're usually only rolling it up in, like, a sausage or something. Any sort of, like, real shaping requires that heat. You are going to burn yourself. Please wear gloves. It is solvent stable, which is very neat for clear plastic. It means you can use other glues and it will not melt. There is nothing you can apply to this plastic that will melt it, which includes things like acetone. So you can do things like shape it over full styrofoam and then dump the whole thing into an acetone bath and melt the styrofoam out. Do that outdoors. It will kill you if you do it inside.
I have used it to make molds.
Yep. Yeah, you can mold in it as long as you use enough mold release. It's fantastically versatile plastic once you get the hang of it, but please don't make it your first plastic for thermoplastics. You will regret it. It can be dyed. That's how you get these colors here that are examples. It also on its own, if you squish it together, it will give you a milky, icy effect, which is really useful for ice and crystals. If you look online, we will tell you it's not self-adhesive. That's because it's just easier to tell people it doesn't do a thing. When I talk about it, it is self-adhesive, but the problem is there's only about 5 degrees of temperature where it will stick to itself, and then it turns into hot glue. So I don't recommend trying to self-adhese Transpart for anything that is an important weight piece, anything that's going to flex. You want to be using glue for that. I use various cryoacrylates for it if it's going to be seen, because a cryoacrylate shows up clear, so it keeps the transparency. If it's not going to be seen, I use high-temp hot glue or contact cement. Contact cement works a little bit better. High-temp hot glue is when I'm lazy. Other things to consider is that it is not optically clear. It is not meant for visors that you're going to be looking through, and there are injection lines. So large pieces.
Can't see through it.
Yeah, you're like, it's clear, but it's not transparent, or it's translucent, not perfectly transparent. So please keep that in mind.
It is. It's a specialty thermoplastic. If you want to get something with like lights in it or something like that, like
or things that are going to be like. Let's say you're making a crystal globe for an art project and it's going to be handled by a bunch of kids because you're doing Elsa's snowflake. You could make that out of resin and you could make that out of acrylic, but both of those will break and also be kind of sharp, but also both of those will break if a kid whacks it against something. I cannot stress enough that you can't break Transpart. It's a lot closer to vinyl, so it's got a lot of rubber bounce to it. It does not shatter; it just bends.
It's really hard to cut into, even.
Yeah, it's got some tooth to it. Like, you could still cut it with a regular pair of scissors, but it wants to, like, it bounces. Cobra Cast Art is another one of our specialty plastics. It is really useful for sewing. If you sew, Cobra Cast Art is for you. If you don't sew, I mean, it's also fun for armor builds, but that's what this is. Cobra Cast Art is thermoplastic interfacing. It's an incredibly lightweight, it's less than a millimeter thick. It's very, very sticky. It works really, really well just wrapped around foam if you want a hard, very thin, very, very lightweight coating for something like a pair of horns. I like it for horns a lot because it doesn't add any weight, but if my horns fall, they won't get dented. And it will self-stand. Like it supports its own weight very well with any sort of like light structure. You can see here it's used for some hat pieces. It was used for all of the structure for this Symmetra headpiece that was later coated in foam. So it gives you lightweight, very, very sticky, not breathable plastic. It is reheatable as well. But what I really love it for is collars and cuffs, anything that needs to stand up on its own where you might use heavy interfacing and wire. It will replace those and keep your profile very, very thin. So definitely worth playing with. I don't have a lot of examples for it right now because it's still kind of new, and Germany is really, really bad at advertising it, so I've got to do all the work for myself. A lot of like shade, sadly, but no shade. A lot of the examples that they've used or that they had folks make is really just, why would I use CobraCast for this? I could just use a Bristol board or a plastic file. So that's something to keep in mind. Flame red art. You're not going to use it. It exists. Okay, if you have lots of money, buy flame red art. It's beautiful. It's the best Warble I sell. It's gorgeous. It's so smooth. It's so nice to carve. It's so expensive. Only buy it if you're made out of money or if you need it to be flame resistant. That's what it exists for. Last two Warble products are Deco Art and Crystal Art. They are pellets. You heat them up, you squish them together, you mold them. They can be shaped by hand to a degree, but they're not best for that. So you can see here, this is how the friendly plastic alternative Deco Art. This is a non-complex plastic. This will degrade over time. I can't tell you how much time because I think it's a slightly different formula than a friendly plastic, but it's the same base idea. A lot of people use these for teeth. We have not tested it to be food safe. Please don't tell people you can use it for teeth. Just tell people you've used it for teeth. There is a slight difference in that phrasing. It's important. I can't tell you if it's safe to put in your mouth. It's non-toxic. It should be safe to put in your mouth, but we've never tested that. That's an expensive test. We have to get it. Warble is actually the only plastic you could buy that's ASTM tested, besides friendly plastic, which means we spend $2,000 to $4,000 every year to have it lab tested to make sure that it's actually as non-toxic as we say. We are certified. So this isn't just non-toxic because the lab says, like we say it is. It's fully tested and is continually tested. This is how I made my teeth for my Demogorgon. This is just friendly plastic. I heated it by hand. It stays pliable for a while. So if you want to, oh yeah, please don't put friendly plastic directly on your teeth. So if you want to shape something, you're going to want to dump it right into cold water as soon as you're done shaping it, or gravity will try to pull it out of shape. I have had people email me telling me that they tried to shape fangs directly on their teeth and then they couldn't get them off and they wanted to know how. And I was like, I think you need to go to your dentist. Crystal art is the same idea, but it gives you a clear, like milky, translucent result. Really, really great as a replacement for resin casting when you don't have time for resin casting. It gives you a bouncy, rubbery effect. So it's really great for things that might be pointy that you don't want to be sharp, because you can get some good edges on that, but they don't hurt. They're like monster rubber instead. Can also be dyed. Do I have examples? Yes, it can also be dyed. Or painted, or mixed in with different medias to get different effects, like glitter. So yeah, this is.
You really don't like the smell of resin.
Oh yeah, this is also good. You don't need to. You could do this indoors. I could do this like literally next to my pregnant best friend in a tiny hotel room. There is no smell. There's no off gassing. Crystal art is also a higher activation temperature. You must use gloves, but otherwise is a phenomenal alternative when you don't need perfectly clear crystals and you want to be able to make them. There's no cure time. It's just how long it takes to cool down. I'm mostly going to skip the how to make Warbleless stuff work, besides like some pictures of you heat it up, it gets floppy. You wrap the floppy around your thing. stick it to itself, trim off the excess. You can see here we've built up with some foam and then just laid Warble over top of it, so you get all those indented details. This is Warble on both sides of a piece of foam. Or you can wrap it only on around an edge if you're not going to see the inside. And all of this, by the way, is on warble.com. There is a website dedicated to this product that I run that has like 250 tutorials on it at this point, so there's all those references. And yes, you can indent and sculpt into Warble as well as all the previous details we've seen. So yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left, and this is where I'd be like, please ask questions if you've got questions. I haven't touched on Fibra as a plastic because it's really difficult to get these days and kind of discontinued, but it is another alternative to Warbla. It's closer to using like hot bubble gum and is really best for somebody who's already familiar with thermoplastics because it's very tricky to use the first time you use it.
I find it's good for like small details because it is very sticky. It's hard to do like the wraparound thing with it. It gets really messy.
Yeah, it shows fingerprints, and it's also I find really hard to do sculpted details in if something needs to support itself because it transfers its heat so quickly. So like I tried to do a little staff for one of my dolls that are behind my head. Oh right, guys can't see me. So I tried to do a staff for one of my little dolls, and I would be sculpting and then I would heat an area to do more detail into it, and that heat would transfer up and down from where I was holding it, and so my fingers would be squishing in where I'd already sculpted. It was really, really difficult to like zoom in on areas I only wanted to heat. Warbla does not transfer its heat very far outside of the range you were pointing it at.
I also don't think it holds paint very well, Fibra.
I found that too. And like,
It's red off.
So yeah, okay, that's not just me because I was just like, oh no, it's fine. I'm like, every test I've ever done, the paint just comes right off, and I'm like,
it's like trying to paint plastic. You need a specific type of paint, or it's not going to stay.
Warbla, you could paint with anything that remotely will look at plastic. I've used oils, I've used acrylics, I've used spray paints, I've used dollar store paints. Like, don't use watercolors, and you'll probably be fine. So yeah, if you've got other questions, this is the time to ask them. We got 10 minutes to go.
Although I guess we didn't mention like priming.
No. I left off on that thing. You will find if you're looking online, if you're talking about priming, there are 1,000,001 options. All options are valid. However, best options for foam are going to be either heat sealing, Plastidip, or FlexBond. Yeah, FlexBond. If you're Canadian, you're using FlexBond. Ain't nobody got time or money for Plastidip.
Yeah, you need to prime foam because it's so porous. Like, it needs to be primed before you paint it. Otherwise, you're just going to eat your paint.
Yeah.
You'll be doing layer and layers and layers.
A lot of people will use wood glue or white glue for Warbla priming or even for foam priming, and I really don't recommend it because those aren't flexible. FlexBond is what I recommend for everything if it's remotely going to flex and it's not summer. Because you can paint it, there's no fumes. It's pretty low cost because Cosplay Supply started decanting the bottles a couple of years ago. You used to only be able to get it in a gallon. Now you can get it 16 ounces. It's great. So that stuff, you just brush it on. It self-levels pretty well. If you've got more brush strokes, you can use a wet finger to just kind of burnish them out. You can wet sand it to a degree. I don't like wet sanding it. I know some people who have success with it. I find it tears. I think it's like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, so always test that. But FlexBond will stick to your Warbla and will grip your paint. So if you drop a piece, it's not going to flake off. Wood glue and white glue will dry, and as they cure over a period of time, usually like 6 months down the line, so this is the second time you're wearing a costume, you drop that piece and it's going to chip your paint off and flex. That also leave a textured gap. It's a pain in the butt to fix afterwards.
Yeah, you'll get cracks and stuff if you don't have the flex seal.
We also have Pop Frox was mentioning it's FlexBond is water soluble, so yeah, you want to clear coat it if you're doing like a very wet paint. I FlexBond and I acrylic paint it, and then I do any of my like washes, and I find that's fine. But also, this is assuming that you're not going to be wearing your costumes out in the rain. Yeah, clear coat everything if you're going to be getting stuff wet. So you can use gesso. The problem with gesso is, again, it's not particularly flexible and it takes forever to sand smooth.
Yeah.
My favorite non-flex bond primer is actually heavy duty auto body spray filler, but it only is useful for the 4 months in the summer when you can spray. But for warble places that are not going to flex particularly much, that is my go-to. I love that stuff. 2 or 3 coats and you've got a smooth surface. One hit of sanding. If I need like one extra layer, I might like flex bond on top of that, or flex bond first and then spray it. But that's phenomenal for filling in and smoothing stuff out. It's just,
I like to mix gesso half with Mod Podge
oh yeah,
to give it that sort of like gluey flexibility. And also I've found that like regular Warbler, you can just sand it. You don't even have to prime it. You can just sand it and it'll
you can
smooth
straight
out
sand Warbler. Definitely recommend a Dremel or some form of sanding tool.
Yeah, it'll take a while.
Yeah, you can sand other warblers, but black tends to get a little wonky. Dremel actually sponsored us to do a bunch of tests with their Dremels and our tools, and I found, yeah, the best really was working with Finest Art. Black, you have to be careful because if you're pressing too much, or if you're using the wrong sanding drum, the heat of the friction will stick the dust together.
Sticky, yeah, that's right. Questions?
Yep.
Last questions.
While people are waiting to ask questions, other things, if you are buying Warbler, buy it online. Cosplay Supplies is your cheapest option if you have time to get it shipped. Otherwise, do check where to buy on the warbler.com website, which lists all of our current retailers. If you're buying from Michaels, again, only use it with a coupon. That is why it's so expensive at Michaels. The thing to remember, because I get this a lot and people don't realize, and we can't quite put it on the website because it's like a money thing, but each size of Warbler is the big sheet cut in half, and then that cut in half, and then that cut in half. So don't buy 2 smalls, buy 1 medium. You will pay less and get the same amount of Warbler. I mean, it's great to take your money. Like, it's an extra $5 in my pocket. Well, not mine, actually, at all, but you know what I mean. But please, please, please just buy the next sheet up. If you're doing a group order with a bunch of friends, buy the jumbo and then break it down yourselves rather than buying 4 larges. You will save so much money. Oh gosh, I don't actually have the text, the captions on. I can only imagine. I've watched it try to figure out what Warbler is before, and yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how that's coming out in the captions.
Apparently it's having some fun.
Transpa art?
Transpart. Blame the Germans, that's all I could say.
I didn't mention, speaking of transpa art, like if you wanted, there's a type of foam that you can use to light up.
Oh yeah.
LED foam. It's actually, I've got my glowworm here. And so all the white section is actually, the way it's designed is that the light will shine through it. The only thing I found is that you can't really paint it.
You need really thin paint. Airbrushing with translucent colors works pretty well. And Sharpies or alcohol ink works pretty well. Oh. But regular paint, no.
But the light will it still shine through if you do that? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I think the LED foam is super fun.
And we have Lindsay
joining
in once more.
Hello, guys. That was fantastic. That was
Thank you.
Amazing. I hope that everyone... and because we've had a couple of questions about other panels that we've been doing, we are recording this, so we will upload them onto our YouTube at some point. I'm not going to say today because I can't guarantee that will happen, but at some point they will be up on our YouTube channel so that you can watch it. Yes, repeatability. Yes. That way you can be like, what did they say? I just forgot to take notes.
How awkward was I?
You were awesome. Both of you were very awesome.
Thank
Yay.
you.
Thank you very much. Big round of applause for...
Thank you guys so much for
Sarah and
watching.
Amanda. Yay.
Find us on the
Go make
Instagrams
some
or whatever.
stuff.
And go make some
Go
stuff.
make some stuff.
And please go to the Warbler website if you've got questions. And then don't ask me how large a 9x12 sheet of Warbler is.
Again, check out our dealers and our artists on our website, www.kanji.ca. You can find them on our Facebook group. And come check out the Discord. We're having some very fun conversations in there. We had a great chat last night about convention stories, which we will be doing again tonight at 9. And we are going to... our Twitch stream is being taken over right now. It's some... I think someone evil is taking over our Twitch stream. So
Oh no, not that
I
guy.
see.
yeah,
I
that
see.
guy. So stay
Yeah, it's time for us to
tuned.
go.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.